I should have just kept walking. That's what any normal guy would have done. But then again, nothing about this was ever going to be normal. It started with a parking spot. A stupid slab of concrete in front of the building where I'd just moved in. I'd been living there for a week, barely unpacked, still tripping over boxes in my apartment. And then one late afternoon, just as the sun slid low behind the roofs, she showed up. "You're using my parking spot," she said. Not angry. Not loud. Just matter of fact. But her voice carried this steadiness that froze me mid-step. I turned, and that's when I saw her. She wasn't some teenager trying to pick a fight, not one of those neighbors who had too much time on their hands. No, she was different. Mid-40s maybe. Dark hair pulled back, a strand loose against her cheek. A fitted jacket over a simple shirt, keys dangling from her fingers. The kind of woman you don't expect to confront you in the fading light. I felt my throat tighten. Right. Sorry. I didn't know. Her eyes softened, though she didn't smile. She just looked at me a second longer than necessary, like she was deciding if I was worth forgiving. "It happens. New tenant?" "Yeah. Just moved in. Unit 3B. "Thought so," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I'm in 2A. Guess we're neighbors. Co-tenants, technically." The word, co-tenant, stuck in the air, heavier than it should have been. I nodded too quickly. "Want to share it?" I don't even know why I said that. Maybe because she made me nervous. Or maybe because part of me wanted to keep talking, to keep her from walking past me and leaving the night colder than it already felt. Her head tilted, just a fraction, as if she hadn't expected me to push back at all. "Share a parking spot?" she repeated. "Sure," I said. "We'll trade off. I don't even have a car half the time." My voice cracked like I was 16 again. I shoved my hands in my pockets. For a second, the only sound was the hum of a distant lawnmower, and the faint rattle of wind against the stairwell. She studied me like she was trying to read something between the lines of my face. Then, finally, the corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but enough to make my chest feel too tight. "Maybe," she said. That was all. One word. But it wasn't dismissive. It was suspended. Like she was leaving the door cracked. We ended up walking toward the stairwell together, side by side, a silence stretched out between us that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. I noticed how her perfume clung faintly to the air, how she pressed her keys into her palm too tightly, how she kept her gaze straight ahead. When we reached the mailboxes, she stopped. I did too, though I didn't need to. For some reason, I couldn't just keep going. She opened her mailbox, flipped through envelopes, then glanced at me again. "You're younger than most people who move in here," she said quietly. I shrugged. "Guess I like being unpredictable." She didn't laugh, but her lips parted like she almost wanted to. Instead, she slipped the mail under her arm and brushed past me. But in that small motion, her shoulder grazing mine, the faint heat of her skin against my sleeve, something clicked. Too quick, too light, but enough. She hesitated at the stairwell, hand on the railing, then glanced back once more. And that was the moment that stuck. That look, half challenge, half question, like she wasn't sure whether to end the conversation or start something neither of us had expected. "Maybe sharing's not such a bad idea," she said. And then she disappeared down the hall. I told myself it was nothing. A parking spot. A coincidence. A neighborly misunderstanding that would fade as soon as I learned the building's rhythm. But when I saw her again the next evening, balancing grocery bags against her hip while fumbling with her keys, I didn't keep walking. I stepped forward before I could think. "Here, let me." I reached for one of the bags. She hesitated, almost refusing, then let it slide into my arms. "Thanks. They always double bag, and it still feels like it's about to split." Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked over me like she was gauging my intention. I carried the bag into her apartment without asking, and she didn't stop me. That felt dangerous already. Her place smelled faintly of citrus and old books, a mix that was strangely grounding. Stacks of mail were neatly arranged on the counter, a jacket draped over a chair, a half-finished glass of wine left near the sink. It looked lived in but lonely. "Sorry about the mess," she said quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's not messy," I answered. My voice came out softer than I meant. "Looks like a real home." Something shifted in her expression, just a flicker, but I caught it. A kind of ache hiding under her composed exterior. I set the bag down and glanced at her. She'd shed her jacket, revealing a faded gray sweater that clung to her shoulders in a way that made it hard to look away. She was older, yes, but not in the way people use that word to mean diminished. There was something sharper, more alive about her than anyone my age. "Were you married?" I asked before I could stop myself. She stilled, her hand on a drawer handle. For a moment I thought I'd gone too far. But then she exhaled and gave a small, almost bitter smile. "Divorced. A year ago." Her fingers tapped lightly against the counter. "I still forget to buy for one." The room went quiet. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every detail. The hum of the fridge, the faint clink of glass as she shifted her weight, the sound of my own breathing. I should have said something light, something to steer us back to neutral ground. But instead I just stood there, watching the way she avoided my eyes. And I knew then this wasn't just about a parking spot, or groceries, or being neighbors. It was about the fact that she carried something broken inside her, and I wanted to be close enough to feel it. When she finally looked at me, it was quick, almost defensive. "You probably have somewhere else to be." "I don't," I said. Too fast. Too honest. Her lips parted, like she was weighing something dangerous. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. Not much, just enough that her hand brushed my arm as she reached for the wineglass. The contact was fleeting, but it set every nerve alight. "You could stay a while," she murmured, not quite looking at me. "It's quiet here when I'm alone." My throat tightened. Every instinct told me to keep it casual, to laugh it off. But my heart was already answering for me. I told myself I'd only stay for a drink. One glass, polite conversation, then I'd head back upstairs before things twisted into something I couldn't explain. But that's not how it went. Her apartment was too warm, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. She poured the wine with a steady hand, but her shoulders looked tense, like she was holding something back. "You don't have to babysit me, you know," she said, sliding my glass across the counter. "I've been living alone long enough." "I don't mind," I answered. It was true. More true than I wanted it to be. We sat at her small kitchen table. The dim light above us cast soft shadows across her face. Up close, I noticed the faint crease between her brows, the way her sweater sleeve slipped slightly down her wrist, exposing the pale curve of skin there. Little things that shouldn't matter but did. She asked me about school, about work, about why someone my age would move into an old building like this. I gave half answers, too busy watching the way her fingers circled the rim of her glass. Then she surprised me. "Do you ever regret things too early?" she asked suddenly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, looking past me as though the answer was written on the wall. "Like, before they even happen. Like you already know the cost." Her words hit somewhere I didn't want them to. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, her phone buzzed against the counter. She reached for it, frowned, and flipped it face down without answering. "Persistent?" I asked carefully. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Just someone who doesn't take no very well." Her tone said she wasn't talking about sales calls. The air tightened between us. I wanted to ask more, but she cut me off with a look, the kind that dares you to dig deeper but begs you not to. We both sipped our wine, the silence stretching, until she leaned across the table to grab the bottle. Her hand brushed mine, light, accidental, but enough to freeze us both. I should have pulled back. Instead, I stayed still, let the touch linger longer than it should have. Her breath caught. Not loud, not obvious, but I heard it. Before either of us could speak, A knock sounded at the door. Sharp, sudden, shattering the fragile moment. She stiffened instantly. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "Don't move," she whispered, standing quickly. I sat frozen, heart hammering, listening as she cracked the door open just enough to speak to whoever was on the other side. A man's voice filtered through, too muffled to catch words, but low enough to curl tension into the room. When she returned, she pressed the door shut firmly, leaning against it for a beat too long. "Everything okay?" I asked. Her gaze met mine, wide and unsettled, and then softened. She crossed the room slowly, almost like she was walking against the current. When she reached me, she stopped close, too close. Her hand rested lightly on the back of my chair, her eyes searching mine. "You should probably go," she said, but her voice betrayed her. It didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like a test. And I knew if I leaned forward, just a few inches, we wouldn't be able to take it back. She didn't move her hand from the back of my chair. She didn't move at all. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the faint sound of traffic outside. I could feel her presence as if the room had shrunk, as if everything I knew about right and wrong had narrowed down to this one moment. "You should probably go," she said again, softer this time. I stood slowly, not sure if I was obeying or defying. My chest felt tight, like my ribs couldn't contain everything pressing inside them. "Do you really want me to?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up, sharp, caught off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then exhaled like the question had stolen air from her lungs. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. The words fell heavy between us, stripped bare of the careful distance she tried to keep. I swallowed hard. "I do." That was reckless. I saw it in the way her lips parted, the faint tremor in her hand against the chair. I wasn't supposed to say that. She wasn't supposed to hear it. "You're too young," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "This is—" She broke off, shaking her head. "You don't know what you're doing." "Maybe I don't," I said, stepping closer. "But I know how I feel when I'm around you." Her breath caught again, sharper this time. She took a small step back but didn't create enough distance. Not enough to break what was hanging in the air. I could see the conflict written across her face, the pull toward me and the push away from herself. "You think this is simple?" she whispered. "No," I said. "That's why I can't stop thinking about it." Her hand dropped from the chair. She brushed past me, pacing toward the counter, like movement alone could save her. She gripped the edge of it, knuckles pale. For a long moment, her back was to me, her shoulders rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Finally, she turned, her eyes glassy with something I couldn't name. "I promised myself I wouldn't do this again. That I wouldn't let anyone close enough to wreck what's left." My throat tightened. "I'm not here to wreck anything. You don't get to decide that," she snapped, but the sharpness faltered in her voice. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I stepped forward despite myself. "Then let me ask you this. Why didn't you make me leave the second I walked in?" The silence that followed was unbearable. She looked at me like I had peeled something open she had buried for too long. Her hand lifted slightly, like she wanted to reach for me, but stopped halfway. And then, nothing. Just her eyes locked on mine, her lips parted with words unsaid, her body still caught between running and staying. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't permission. But it was enough to tell me we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't pretend away. The silence stretched, so taut it felt like a string ready to snap. I was about to say something, anything, when she turned her face away, as if ashamed of the look I'd just caught. "You remind me of someone," she said finally. Her voice was low, uneven. I frowned. "Who?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the counter. "My son's best friend. Years ago. He was your age, maybe a little younger. He used to come around here all the time." Her words landed heavy, pulling the ground out from under me. My chest tightened. I didn't know what to do with that piece of truth, except stand there and let it sting. "I'm not him," I said quietly. I know that. Her voice cracked, just slightly. She pressed a hand to her temple. But the way you talk, the way you look at me, it's too close. I can't. She cut herself off, biting her lip hard. The air in the room shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just about her and me. It was about history, ghosts, things I had nothing to do with but was already tangled in. I don't want to be a reminder, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She finally looked at me again. Then what do you want to be? The question hit harder than I expected. What did I want to be? I thought about the way I couldn't stop noticing the loose strand of her hair, the way her voice lingered in my head even after I left, the way my chest pulled toward her like I had no choice in the matter. I want to be someone you don't have to hide from, I said before I could talk myself out of it. Her breath caught. The tension between us thickened, almost unbearable. And just then, her phone buzzed again on the counter. Louder this time, vibrating against the wood. She flinched. She grabbed it quickly, glanced at the screen, then shoved it face down again. But not before I caught the name flashing across it. Daniel. I knew that name. She had mentioned him once in passing, her son, away at school. My pulse spiked. That's my son, she finished sharply. Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to push further. The weight of it crashed down all at once. I was standing in the kitchen of a woman who wasn't just older, wasn't just vulnerable, she was someone's mother. Someone my age. You see why this is impossible, she whispered, almost pleading. Why it can't be more than a mistake we never let happen. I should have agreed. I should have walked out. But instead, I stepped closer, my voice shaking. Then why do you keep letting me stay? Her lips parted, and for a second, she didn't have an answer. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she'd said. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. A line had been crossed, even without a touch. She stood there, caught between denial and confession, the weight of everything unsaid pressing on her shoulders. I could see it, the battle behind her eyes, the way she wanted to push me out and pull me closer at the same time. I stepped toward her slowly, afraid one wrong move would send her retreating for good. I'm not him, I said again, softer this time. I'm not your son's friend. I'm not a reminder. I'm me. And I can't keep pretending I don't. I trailed off, shaking my head, frustrated with my own lack of courage. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her eyes glossed over, a sheen she blinked hard against. She whispered, almost to herself, I swore I wouldn't do this again. I froze. Do what? Let someone close enough to break me, she said. The words came out sharp, but her voice wavered at the end. Silence stretched. My chest ached, not from rejection but from the raw truths she just laid out. And maybe because I knew she wasn't wrong, I could hurt her, even without meaning to. I swallowed hard. I'm not here to break you. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. That's what they all say. The words stung, but I didn't back away. Maybe. But I mean it. We stood there, staring, the air so tight it was almost unbreathable. And then, finally, she moved. Not with certainty, not with some grand, cinematic sweep. Just a step closer, small but undeniable. Her hand brushed mine. Barely. And that single, trembling contact felt louder than any confession either of us could make. I turned my palm, letting our fingers graze, then catch. Her hand fit against mine awkwardly, uncertain, hesitant, but real. Tell me to leave, I said, voice breaking. If you don't want this, tell me, and I'll go right now. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked away, then back, as though she couldn't quite look at me and couldn't bear not to. I can't, she whispered. And just like that, restraint shattered. I pulled her closer, not in some reckless rush but in a way that felt like finally breathing after holding it too long. She didn't resist. Her forehead rested against my chest, her breath unsteady, her body trembling like she hated herself for needing the contact as much as she did. We didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't about that. It was about finally admitting we weren't strangers orbiting danger. We were already in it, already changed by it. "I don't know where this goes," she said against me, her voice muffled. "Neither do I," I answered honestly. "But I know I don't want to pretend anymore." Her fingers tightened in mine. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't clean. But it was something. And in the silence that followed, I realized that was enough, for now. The night lingered long after the moment passed. We stayed there, standing too close in her kitchen, holding on like either of us wanted to let go. No grand declarations, no fireworks. Just the quiet weight of honesty finally spoken. When she finally pulled back, her eyes searched mine. "We can't undo this," she said. "I don't want to," I answered. Her expression softened, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't hide behind careful distance. She let me see the truth in her face, tiredness, regret, but also something fragile and alive. Something she'd been protecting for too long. We sat down at the table again, this time without the buffer of small talk. She told me about the divorce, about how lonely the apartment had felt since her son left. How the silence at night could be unbearable. How she'd promised herself she'd never need anyone again. And I admitted what I hadn't dared to before, that I'd been drawn to her from the very first moment. That her voice, her presence, even the way she carried herself, had pulled me in deeper than I could explain. That maybe it was wrong, but it felt more right than anything else I'd known. The honesty didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years between us or the weight of her past. But it shifted something. Instead of circling around what we couldn't say, we let the words spill out, messy and flawed and real. By the time the clock on her stove blinked past midnight, I knew things had changed. Not in some fairy tale way. We weren't suddenly free of guilt or doubt. But we weren't pretending anymore. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she reached for my hand again. This time, without hesitation. "Whatever this is," she said softly, "don't make it a secret you regret." I nodded. "I won't." Her thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, and the gesture said more than anything else could. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't even a promise of tomorrow. But it was a beginning. One we both chose, even knowing the risks. As I stepped into the night, the cool air hit me hard, and I realized how much had shifted in such a short time. She wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She wasn't just someone else's mother, or someone defined by her past. She was the woman who had let me see her at her most vulnerable. And somehow, she had let me stay. And that was enough. For now. Sparkles, did you enjoy the story? Thought Balloon, what kind of stories would you like to hear next?